All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Don Saucer. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of our Teaching and Learning Center, and you have found your way to our Professional Development Series. Our Professional Development Series meets the entirety of the academic year on Wednesdays at noon in real time over Zoom. You can use this link for all of our events. We also record our events for asynchronous viewing and post them on our webpage later. And this is going to be one that you're going to want to look at later and have your colleagues watch too. In a minute, I'll give a couple more announcements. Before that, I want to begin today with a land acknowledgement.
Cydney, would you mind stopping the screen share so I can share my screen really quickly? Cool, thank you. All right, let's see. Okay. All right, does that look good to you, Don? Do you see it? Okay, perfect, cool. Here we go.
As the first land-grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is, historically, home to many native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska.
Many native nations utilized the western plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation of this institution was, and still is, stolen land.
We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through indigenous contexts is essential.
Please remember
These truths,
because we still remember.
Thank you. For the people who are attending today who may not know, we have a professional development certificate that you can earn through the TLC if you attend events and complete post-event surveys and reflections and things like that. My colleague Ashley Schiffer will drop that information for you in the chat. If you're a faculty member, we also have the opportunity for you to potentially be named a TLC fellow, and we'll have the information available for you at that link as well. We have an amazing series. As I mentioned before, we meet every Wednesday at noon in real time and record our events. Next week, Tim Bolton will be presenting on large classes for students who have to take them, whether they want to or not. I'm very excited for that presentation, but I'm also very excited for today's presentation, which we're super excited that Dr. Cydney, Alexis, and Dr. Theresa, Merrick, Cassidy are here to present on teaching with AI, best practice examples for continued excellence in teaching. Without further ado, Dr. Alexis, Dr. Merrick, Cassidy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Don. We are excited to be back. So hello, everyone. As everybody said, I'm Theresa. I'm an instructor in English, and I am the Assistant Director of the Writing Center at K-State. I'll let Cydney introduce herself real quick here too.
Cydney Alexis, also Associate Professor in English with a specialization in Writing Studies.
So the two of us have been in the midst of a long ongoing project exploring AI in higher education. And so we're excited to bring you what we're learning, what we feel are emerging as best practices. And today's discussion is part of our year-long Teaching with AI series, which we've done in partnership already with the Teaching and Learning Center. So you'll see up on the screen here that we first started this year off with kind of an introductory toolkit on tackling AI in teaching. And so if you weren't able to check that out yet, or if you're interested in learning more, the website at tlc.com has the copy of our presentation and our materials so you can have a closer look. So we want to just let you know that we're continuing the conversation today with some more in-depth resources and ideas to promote excellence in your teaching practices with AI. And to begin, Cydney's going to read for you our critical AI literacy statement, which will frame our discussion today.
So as writers, teachers, and scholars, we believe in the importance of engaging with emergent technologies in mindful ways to benefit our own writing practices, our students' writing practices, our colleagues' practices, and those of the broader community. Writing and teaching have relied on tools from the quill pen to the typewriter to the laptop and now to large language models such as ChatGPT and Claude. Part of mindful AI tool use is approaching them through the lens of critical AI literacy, using tools in a way that benefits people, is conversant in the real and potential systemic harms that affect marginalized communities, such as the way that LLM output replicates bias in the materials used to train these models, that discusses ethical and privacy concerns, such as LLM models having been trained on copyright material, and that educates people regarding real and potential environmental harms due to LLM use, such as the vast amount of energy and water required to run and cool AI data centers. While this presentation focuses on AI and teaching excellence and encourages innovative and creative exploration of Gen AI tools, we also encourage participants to adopt critical AI literacy practices, to read LLM privacy and data use terms and conditions and facts, and to discuss these issues in workplaces and with students. In building this presentation, we have utilized the pro versions of ChatGPT and Claude.
So to begin, we actually have 2 takeaways from our last presentation that we think are useful in getting started today. The first is that we believe you can exist as an instructor in this gray area on AI and still teach and explore it, and teach and explore AI literacy in your classrooms. It's okay if you're coming into the presentation today feeling like you don't know that you really like AI, you don't know that it's something you fully want to adopt. You can still work with it and talk with your students about it in this gray area, in this position. And then alongside that, your approach to AI with your students can be open, it can be uncertain, it can be evolving. And it's the transparency of the conversation when we don't have all the answers at this point in time, in this still somewhat emerging technology moment, that you can talk about it in that framework with your students and still be successful. And so with that in mind, we are going to take a look at some best practices for a few different areas of your teaching practice.
So, we've already mentioned critical AI literacy, but we just want to stress the idea that the foundations of AI use in higher education require these transparent ethical conversations. And these are questions about privacy. What do LLMs, for example, do with your data? And for companies that care about this, they're explicit about talking about this in their facts. But also intellectual copyright, just having an awareness and talking with students about the fact that the main corpus of large language models like ChatGPT and Claude, the reason why some people feel a little uncomfortable is that they built their corpus on intellectually copyrighted material. And we'll talk a little bit in this presentation about differences between LLMs in terms of how they're treating copyright and privacy. And so we'll talk about that a little bit in more depth later. Academic honesty, environmental concerns, as you heard in our critical AI literacy statement, disclosure, and our position generally is going to be that we're not going to tell you to work one way or another, but we're going to raise the issue so that you can think about your own perspective and positions. In terms of disclosure, this is multifaceted. This is, are we asking students to disclose their use of generative AI, but then are we also going to disclose our use of generative AI, and how do those 2 things come together? Also, corpus building, which we've talked about a little. Something that we haven't mentioned yet is an opt-in, opt-out framework. So there are a lot of classes that are requiring use of AI, and then there are some that are very restrictive, but we think it's important. It's an emerging best practice to offer students an opt-in, opt-out. In my 2 classes this semester, I have all my students sign a contract that acknowledges that they're aware of my AI policies, which are project to project, and I have a general class policy as well. And I give them an opportunity to opt out if they don't want to test out AI use. And in one class, 3 students did say that they wanted to opt out, and the other all were game to experiment and try. And so it's also an interesting way to find out where students are at.
So we think one of the most impactful ways to establish good critical AI literacy in your classroom is in thinking through your policies. And I'm thinking by this point, especially as we're halfway through the semester, you might already have a policy put into place for your coursework, but perhaps you're recognizing and you're experiencing the ways in which it might be working and you want to continue that approach, or you might want to be adapting or modifying to make something more transparent, something a little bit easier to understand for your students, but also to make your workload as an instructor easier to manage. Because I think all of us, we don't want to be grading AI work. We want to be grading our students' work and testing their awareness of what they're learning in the class. And so policies is where this can really happen. And so we wanted to start first with kind of laying out some considerations that we think are helpful. And so, for example, thinking about different areas of AI use and understanding that your policy might tackle. So, for example, what level of permissiveness or restrictiveness are you wanting to have? And that level might be shifting this semester to next semester, assignment to assignment. You also might be finding that a global policy that you've started with might need to be broken down into a per assignment policy. And we're seeing in the research on AI and teaching that it's becoming more of a best practice to think about a per assignment AI policy just because it works better. You also might want to think about how you're building a contract, or might want to establish a contract system for you and your students so that there is a shared upon agreement of what is going to be happening inside your classes. You might want a policy that better outlines documentation of use, what you're expecting to see when students tell you and disclose what it is that they're doing with AI tools. You might also be considering what happens if these policies aren't followed, what the evaluation of AI ethical, unethical, acceptable, unacceptable use looks like, and what type of consequences you're going to put in place. Students really appreciate knowing that, obviously. Thinking about the why of your policy kind of underlines all of these things so far. What are you thinking about in terms of what you're wanting to pass on to your students? Do you want to be demonstrating the importance of knowing how to access AI and also helping them to be more aware of risks and harms? Your policy can be communicating a lot of that. The other aspect of your policy might be what tools and technologies you are either recommending to them, suggesting they might steer away from, or giving them information about how to make the best choices for tools based on a variety of factors. And so as we're talking, we're going to show you some examples in the chat or in the next few slides of language of other instructors using, policies in their classrooms so that we can take a closer look. If you have been finding something particularly effective in your own policy and want to share it in the chat, I'd love to see us have that kind of conversation while we're discussing. But our next few slides are going to come from policies inside a repository that is available online. Lance Eaton has been collecting sample policies from across higher education. And these policies are often given for free use by other instructors. So we're going to link it, but we're also going to show you a few examples in the next few slides.
And I just wanted to comment quickly on a few things. In terms of contracts, Theresa has built a contract with students. This is obviously much easier in an in-person classroom, but that's an approach that you can take. And another emerging best practice is meeting with the instructor first, and this is a huge labor burden on instructors, having to meet with students, but it is becoming clear that their students are encountering different policies in every one of their classes every semester that they're taking classes. They are having trouble remembering policies, no matter how clearly you talk about it. And that's why the per assignment policy is gaining ground. It's a reminder as well. I even put it in my Canvas assignment titles, yes AI or limited AI or no AI on this assignment. I remind them on tests, and I'm an online teacher, so I have to give these visual cues. And so just wanted to mention those things before we move on to our next slides, which are examples of policies. So this first one says, it's from an instructor who says, my view is that AI will impact us no matter what, but we also have the power to shape how AI develops if we engage with it thoughtfully. This class gives you a safe space to creatively experiment with AI without shame, fear, or guilt. Let's explore AI as a creative tool to augment our skills, not replace them. I'm excited to see what we can discover together. So key point that we want to emphasize is that, as I think we all probably know, policies and attitudes towards AI are not universal. And they also represent our disciplines and our peers, our colleagues. Perhaps it's your discipline's permission for whether you're able to use it in the classroom or not. And as we said, students are encountering a wealth of these policies. So we're starting with this one because it's on the permissive side. And I do think personally as an online instructor, I would struggle with this permissive of a policy on every assignment just because I don't have that classroom contact with students. But it acknowledges that AI is a tool that gives us an opportunity to participate in continued development of the technology while still recognizing poor use of the tool, right? It uses it signals joint exploration, and it promises this safe space to experiment, which might help students to chime in more.
So here's another one that we can take a look at that is also moderately permissive, but it kind of tackles this from a different angle. This is also a good moment to say that what we're sharing with you is a portion of an instructor's policy and not the entirety. And so we're just focusing in on a couple of details so that we can discuss them. So this one says, never hit copy within your conversation with an AI assistant. You can copy your own work into your conversation, but do not copy anything from the conversation back into your assignment. Instead, use your interaction with the AI assistant as a learning experience, then let your assignment reflect your improved understanding. So this policy tackles some more practical do's and don'ts, which might be helpful for your students because, as we've said, every instructor does have different policies and approaches across different courses, and students are often getting confused and trying to make sure that they understand the boundaries within a particular class. The other thing too is that what becomes acceptable and unacceptable use often gets very blurry for students and for us as writers and instructors, it's hard to tell sometimes when we have approached or crossed the line into having the AI do the work for you versus having it kind of assist in your own learning experience. And so this one offers a very specific example of when that student would cross the line. So this particular moment suggesting that the student can input ideas into the tool as a learning moment, but the output is the part that the instructor does not want to see showing up in an assignment submission. So we like that it's direct, but we also like that it's encouraging about how AI might still improve the student's learning experience.
Just to say that this can be one of the really particular challenges, and we're all getting aware of this because that little Grammarly icon is popping up in every application that we're using, is that it may not be easy for students to understand what it means to copy. They may understand I can't copy and paste a full AI output from an LLM into my paper, but that gets very blurry with Grammarly, for example, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. This one says learning to use technology appropriately is important for lawyers. We'll cover some of them in class. Others you are expected to experiment with at home. You must use them in order to learn their limits. Generative AI tools can be invaluable for generating ideas, identifying sources, synthesizing text, and starting to understand what's essential about a topic. But you must guide, verify, and craft your work product. Do not just cut and paste without understanding. So here's another example of a moderately permissive policy, but it provides examples of what types of uses AI has and frames a relationship between student and tool in a way that emphasizes the need for students to take responsibility for its output. And it connects technology skills to a very specific discipline or profession, which has a nice nuance and understanding that different fields are picking up these tools in different ways.
All right, we have another moderately permissive policy, again, kind of exploring a different tactic. It says AI writing is a brave new world for all of us. In order for me to understand how it's being used, this classroom has an AI full disclosure policy at the end of any assignment where you used AI, ChatGPT, Grammarly, etc. Please tell me what you used it to do. You will not be penalized just for using AI. I simply want to understand where and how it's helpful for students like you. If your AI use appears to entail plagiarizing, I will contact you directly to talk about how to use AI in an acceptable way. So I think this one does a good job of balancing sort of the moment we are in as instructors and students, that this is still uncertain, unknown, and that, again, jointly we can learn from each other how to best tackle AI documentation and best practices. And so in acknowledging the current moment, the instructor is able to say, this is why I'm asking you for documentation, not just because we feel it's a best practice, but also because I'm learning about your use as well. And it outlines next steps if students in experimenting with the tool are approaching that line again, or who have crossed the line. And I think it's a nice framing at the end of the paragraph to say, I'll talk to you about how to use AI in an acceptable way that, and hopefully that this instructor also intends to model how to kind of scale back a plagiaristic attempt to use AI with one that's more in keeping with what the instructor wants the student to learn.
And in terms of disclosure, for example, I have my students submit a project reflection with every major assignment, and they just document what kind of AI assistance they use. My course has a broad, in general, 75-25 rule. 75% should be from your own mind. To the extent that we can, document this now, 25% might be heavy use of Grammarly, for example. And so that's part of the contract that my students sign. And so because they know they can work with it, they disclose to me all these really creative, interesting uses of it. So that's just one way that you can approach this in a creative way. So this one, I think is this our last one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is our last one. So in this class, I asked you to complete your work without using AI, to augment, think through, or write your assignments. There's an exception. You can use AI tools for pre-submission editing, spell check, and grammar check, as long as you don't use them for thinking or drafting. On rare occasions, I may create an assignment in which I ask you to critique content generated by AI. If this occurs, I will provide clear prompts, and I will ask you to meet with me if I think you've been using AI in ways that I haven't permitted. So this is a more restrictive AI policy. It specifies the precise way that AI is permitted and ties back to skills they want students to practice. But we do note that students could feel this tension between paragraph 1 and 2, being asked to use. AI might still be brought into the course, and we're going to be critiquing content together. Just note that this reflects also a person's kind of opinions on AI, and so that would be a conversation that you would want to have with your students, the why behind why we'd be bringing in this content to critique. So we know that AI can be overwhelming for a lot of faculty. It's why we say you can be in a gray area and still explore tools with students. I feel like faculty who are in person in classrooms are really lucky because they have this amazing canvas. You can come into the classroom and you can explore tools with students. And so we put an example of some output that I created in Claude. Let's see how this works when I out to Claude. So I just created a sample prompt. And we really just want to encourage a sense of play. One way that I approach this with students is, I'll ask them, are there any people who are really comfortable? And when I'm in the classroom, I'll assign those students as leaders in the room. And so they can help facilitate conversations with me or help me train students. But here I just asked can you help me think of a topic for a multimodal writing site analysis? I need to think of a site that I can analyze for this project to show how multimodal writing is used at the site. This is an actual assignment topic. I asked students to pick physical location, and they explored the way multimodal writing appears throughout that site. And the reason why I'm using this example is one of my students said to me, I used AI to brainstorm a potential site because I was having trouble. I was feeling really blocked. I didn't know the best site to analyze. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, can you help me think about a site that I must explore? And he said, and from talking with ChatGPT, it suggested coffee shop. And so I thought I'd go and look at Arrow Coffee, which is, for those of you in town, or it's in Manhattan, Kansas. And I said, great, I love Arrow. This will be a really exciting project. So this is what it generated in the first try. And I interact with Claude quite a bit to tell it the length of information that I want. So I've asked Claude not to give me walls of text, not to give me pages and pages of data back. And this is a process that I like with LLMs, is that iterative process of defining how you want it to respond to you and asking it to remember. So it first suggested some ideas, and I said, but all the ideas, when I did this a separate time, it gave me all websites, and I said, no, I want this to be a physical site. So can you give me examples? And I asked it, particularly to Kansas, you can't trust LLM output to varying degrees. They do or do not scrape materials from the web. Claude has not been scraping the web by its own admission, although a participant in one of my sessions yesterday, in our session yesterday, said that Claude has some ability now to actually draw from the web. And so something that I teach students is that you have to check every source and citation that it's producing. ChatGPT does scrape the web, but there are still a lot of hallucinations or mistakes that it will draw up. So, and then I asked it to go even more in depth about one of its suggestions. Imagining a student might say, well, what should I look for in the coffee shop? What kind of writing will I see? And so, Claude said, look at all of these types of information, menu descriptions, layout of the cafe, et cetera, et cetera. And so this nice way for a student to just generate ideas at the start. Oh, sorry, I have to get back to the presentation.
All right, I'm going to share my screen now too, Cydney. So we thought we'd show you a couple of tools. And so I have another one to show you that it's getting a lot of traction and a lot of the media attention lately because there's always something new showing up on the AI horizon. And this is one that you might have heard about a couple of times, the Google Notebook LM, so put out by Google Labs. And it's one that people have been talking about in the media. And let me make sure my screen's pulled up and ready to go. I'll show you what it looks like. The reason we think it's important to kind of learn or figure out what students are up to is that they're often ahead of us on this. They're able to, explore new technologies in ways that it might take us a little bit longer to do. And Notebook LM is one of those tools. So this is the Notebook LM interface. It's kind of a workspace that utilizes text and creates with AI a bunch of different ways to interact with that text or reading. So what you're seeing is my Notebook LM space that is created around a copy of our slides from our previous presentation on AI with the Teaching and Learning Center. So I uploaded a PDF version of it and it created this interface. What I can do up here at the top is create a study guide from it. It'll generate something. I can start, mapping out my own notes. I can ask more questions and I can converse with it like I would another LLM like ChatGPT or Claude. What's getting the most attention is this thing right up here. It's a little podcast, an audio podcast that has been generated with the PDF that I used. I'm going to make sure I have shared my sound for this because I'm going to play a little snippet for you so you can hear it. Hopefully it's working now. Yes. So here we go. This is the podcast utilizing our PDF.
Hey everyone, welcome back. You guys sent in a ton of stuff about AI in education, so we're doing a deep dive into all of it. Looks like we'll be talking about how to adapt teaching, all the ethical stuff, and who knows, maybe we'll uncover some of those light bulb moments for you.
Yeah, it's a hot topic for sure.
Right.
And for good reason. AI is developing so fast, it could completely change education as we know it.
It really could. It's
Wow.
not just about using a new tool in the classroom. It's about how this impacts how we teach. Like, what are we even supposed to be teaching now?
Exactly.
Speaking of teaching, Cydney, Alexis, and Theresa, Merrick, Cassidy, they had this presentation. And they opened with this quote from Salman Khan, you know, the Khan Academy guy. He said, "We shouldn't use something like GPT-4 just because it's cool. We need to think about the problems it can solve."
Right. It's easy to get caught up in what's new and shiny, but we need to be asking, how can this actually help us and our students?
One.
All right, I'll stop there. I think you got a sampling. And as I share the sentiments coming in the chat, this is a little creepy. This is a little, this is new territory. And it's strange to hear, especially academic work, put into this mode, this podcast mode, where you have other speakers talking about it. But we wanted to show it to you because it offers a lot of conversation opportunities for your students. One, because I think a lot of students do utilize AI resources that do things kind of like this, you know, putting text to audio, creating study notes based on a reading that they might have used from your classes. And it's helpful to kind of talk through what are the implications of that. What happens when you take, you know, a particular area of study and turn it into a conversation. Cydney and I did a presentation on AI and voice yesterday with part of the AI symposium, where we did a little bit deeper dive on these tools. And something to know about them and talk about with your students is that when you create a podcast with identifying male, female voices, there's some interesting data about how the male voices are operating in one way and female voices are operating in a different way that might be reinforcing some gender stereotypes that we don't want to perpetuate. But anyways, this is one that if you're hearing about it from students, it might be worth talking about because it's got some scary, if exciting implications. And so that's one we thought would be worth showing you in case you want to have that conversation. And yeah, I agree that for people who are better at listening and learning as opposed to reading text, there's a lot of potential. And so this also can help you learn from your students about the best modes of learning that are working for them.
And also, can I jump in for one
go
second,
for it.
Theresa? And just something to note, again, with these privacy and copyright, I talk with my students. I can't prevent them from uploading my course materials or PDFs into LLMs. They're doing it all the time, but I do talk to them about how the faculty might feel about it, how I feel about it, and that they should be thinking carefully about any of their own materials that they enter into. Like, we have students in engineering working on projects that have sensitive information. Do they have permission to be uploading materials into an LLM that's not protecting copyright? If you're subscribing to a pro version, ChatGPT or Claude in particular, they do state that those materials don't feed the corpus. Grammarly is HIPAA compliant, but it's really important to ask these questions before entering information into these LLMs.
I'm going to keep my screen open because we also wanted to show you another tool, and we've already brought it up. But Grammarly is one of those things that's been around for a while. We think it's worth discussing or maybe revisiting, you and your students, because it's changed, it's evolved a lot, but it's also one of the most widely used tools. About 30 million users have AI or have Grammarly, and they subscribe to it maybe in this interface, which is what you're seeing on my screen. This is me logged into Grammarly with a demo document showing you what its capabilities are. But if you have probably already noticed, Grammarly shows up all over the place now. It can be inside your email inbox. It can be on your browser as an extension. It can be downloaded so that you can use it in all sorts of different activities. But here is what AI or what Grammarly says it does when it works with your document. So what you'll see on the screen is text on the left. And if a student is using this, they would have their document over here to take a look at. So a draft of an essay, something they're working on. And Grammarly is going to start tagging it with different colors. And what it's doing is it's going to tackle different areas of writing. So correctness, that's usually related to things like grammar, punctuation, mechanical issues. But it also does other things. It focuses on things like clarity. it focuses on engagement, which has a little bit to do with, achieving your goals and working with the audience that you might be identifying. And Grammarly gives users the option to kind of input that information at the start of a review. You can say, I'm writing this type of document, I'm working with this type of audience, this is the tone that I want to achieve. This is just the free version of Grammarly. And so everybody has access to this level of help. And then Grammarly also has its premium subscriptions where it claims it will provide even more assistance, help you sound a certain way, help you like dramatically alter your document. And as you'll notice on the right-hand side of the screen here, it offers direct kind of things that you can replace in your own writing to kind of make something more correct, to make something more clear. So as I click on something, it will add it into the document. So the reason we brought this up today is because Grammarly is more typically associated with being like a grammar checker, a punctuation checker, an editor, but it really is an LLM now. It really is an AI tool or a generative AI tool. And we might not have realized that even as instructors, but we're finding that students might not be realizing that this is an AI tool of sorts and that it might not necessarily be something that aligns with your course policies on AI. And so it's probably worth a conversation with your students if it's something you want to permit, kind of explaining what particular uses you're going to find it helpful for, but also kind of having that, awareness talk that this is something that might be blurring those lines once again about AI tool use in a classroom, in a writing setting, in an activity setting, because I don't think everybody thinks of it in that particular way. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can go back to our slides. There we go.
Yeah. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay, let's see. Is it in its... Oh, I need to go backwards. There we go. So we wanted to show you Harvard's website because Harvard's doing some incredible work on the topic of AI. And so we've linked to the AI pedagogy project. And there's just a wealth of resources here. Tools for educators, all kinds of resources, assignment databases, we're going to look at those in a second. This LLM tutorial, we want to steal this make one for K-State. It's really good. Theresa and I have actually walked through this tutorial. You could have students do this. You could do this in the classroom. And so it walks you through the process of creating prompts and sculpting output. You just send a message and it starts you on the way, and it's a really short tutorial, so really fabulous resource. And I also wanted to show you, I'll go back to the full screen after this, their policies and facts, because Harvard does not have a ban on AI use. And in fact, I'd say they're encouraging play, but they're allowing instructors to make decisions. But I think this is a really interesting statement. It supports responsible experimentation with generative AI tools, but still mentions some of the concerns. I like how they already have materials on generative AI and STEM and in writing classes, and they have sample policies and resources that are fantastic. They link out to all kinds of national resources on AI, so you can take a look at this when you have some spare time. Okay. I have exited full screen again, so I'm just going to back.
And so maybe you're feeling like you're ready to tackle some like AI informed assignments in your classes. Maybe you already have some that are successful, but if you're looking for inspiration or just some guidance on how to do that, the AI Pedagogy Project is one of those places where you can go to for some inspiration. We've got two assignments up on the screen because we thought they were kind of good examples of different features you can implement into an AI informed assignment. And so the first one And I'm going to put a link to it directly in the chat. So if you want to, you can take a look at it while we're talking through. Is one that focuses on sort of therapy moments and making telephone triage calls. So it sort of sets up a simulation and uses AI to talk back and forth and help students kind of train in those particular things. And so we really like that it's an assignment that offers a lot of parameters for that type of approach. And then the other one, which again, I'll link here and you can take a closer look at after our presentation, is that this little DuPont analysis of Coca-Cola. So if you're doing like a finance class or business, you want them to run an assignment that has them do data calculations or an activity on their own and compare those results to an AI generated response, you have the ability to kind of set up a really good space for that conversation. And so these are just two examples that we really liked. We thought were well set up, but the AI pedagogy project has a whole bunch of different options that might give you some inspiration or at least help you to formulate better guardrails around the assignments you're creating. Because that's ultimately what you want to do is create guardrails in your assignment so that your students are on a path to success. You can have productive conversations while still meeting the learning outcomes of other skill sets that you want to teach in your classes.
So some strategies, repeat your AI policy more than once, emphasize process and iteration, and really get into the nitty-gritty with students about process, especially knowing, for example, that Grammarly is working as an LLM, so helping students just to think about that more. Stage your assignments, demonstrate how to attach and detach AI from specific tasks. For example, if you want them not to use it in a first draft so that you can experiment with it in a second draft, allow for open dialogue and build in opportunities for reflection.
So we've covered a few areas already of ways you can explore AI or kind of build better practices in assignment building or policies. If you feel like you're ready for something a little bit more advanced, you might find that you want to try using AI for a specific tool or for a specific purpose. So I'm going to share my screen once again to show you one thing that I'm trying out because I was finding that I liked working with AI with my students, but something I wanted to test out was the ability for them to go to AI for some help that I might not be able to scale. So over here, this is Poe, which is kind of a hosting space for different AI platforms. And so you can find GPT, you can find Claude, you can find the Gemini housed in this space, which is, it's nice because it's kind of all in one spot. But over here on the left, you'll see this button that allows you to create your own bot. And it sounds scary, but if I can do this, I am not a coder, I am not experienced in these things, anybody can do it. I created a bot that acts as a client simulator for my engineering students. I wanted them to kind of think through ideas for research projects as if they were talking to a client that might give them some of those tasks. And so I set up a bot. I gave it some prompts and some guidance as to what I wanted, what kind of feedback I want it to provide, what type of assignment they're working with so that it can give responses that would fit those parameters. And so this is the interface. But over here, just to quickly show you, I have a rundown of a sample conversation that a student could have and the output that it would provide. And so with this one, the student could say, you know, I'm training to be a civil engineer. Can you create this simulation for me? And it says, sure. I'm this client for this company. Here's the problem I have. And throughout the conversation, it gives more information that can help the student formulate a plan and an idea. And in this testing experience, I told my students, if you want to run with this project as your topic, I'm okay with that. And you can keep me in the loop about how that experience goes. But it was a way for students to kind of go through that ideation phase of a project with an additional layer of support. And that's where this tool has been really helpful. Cydney has another use that she's going to share.
So I created this quickly for this presentation because I showed a different one yesterday, but I wanted to call it Empathy Bot. That was taken, but This is an empathy bot here to help people see issues from multiple points of view. I can help you engage empathy in a conversation or a piece of writing, or even develop counter arguments. And this came from someone who Theresa and I interviewed for our research project, who told us how she was using AI to see alternative perspectives. And so it gave me this idea. I told it, I don't want you to give long walls of text, and I want you to ask questions where possible. And so the example I used was, I don't understand my teacher's feedback. He said that my writing sounds AI generated. And so it's helping the student to understand this. But like we said, you can really create a bot really quickly, different kinds of bots as well. So prompt bot, a role play bot, image generation, and it'll suggest the best LLM for that tool. But then you can also select your own one, and you just iterate with the bot, communicating back and forth to create it and test it. But something we want to highlight is this is an amazing learning experience for you and your students, because you learn a lot about what LLMs can and can't do from creating a bot. In 1 hour, you will have a different perspective on a lot of this. So it's a really nice teaching tool for that reason. And to go back to presentation, almost done. I'm getting back to share. So you'll see on the screen that we have an upcoming book club, and we'd love for you to join us. Hill Library has the book accessible and to everyone. So we just got notification of this last week, and so you can access that link on the Teaching and Learning Center's website or here. But please come join us for a lively conversation about the book Teaching with AI, a practical guide to a new era of human learning. And then in the spring, we'll be discussing Ethan Mollick's Co-Intelligence, Living and Working with AI. And stay tuned also for our April event.
So we hope today we've made the job of tackling AI in your classrooms feel a little bit more doable. We know that it's an overwhelming topic. We know that there's so many things out there in terms of resources. And so we thought just tackling a few particular tasks will help make your life as an instructor a little bit easier, feel a little bit more approachable, but also to show you that these strategies can really align with your pursuit of teaching excellence, that we want it to be something that makes you a good teacher, that makes you effective with your students. And I think the transparent conversations and activities you can do with them will help you along the way. But as we said, stay tuned for more. But in the meantime, we would love to hear from you and support your own personal navigation of AI in teaching. And so our contact information is up there. And we welcome you reaching out to us if you have particular AI applications you want to look into. But that wraps up our conversation for today. We would be happy to answer questions or talk about things in further detail before we wrap up. If anybody has any things that are really working for them in the class, we'd love to hear that.
I would just say I'm still trying to get over that podcast y'all generated on the Notebook LM. That was eerie. I a lot of my colleagues kind of asked me questions about, how do I keep it from cheating on, say, like an online exam, or those sorts of things. And I realized this wasn't the point of your conversation, but I figured I'd drop the question in case y'all had some guidance on that. So if we're given an exam and we're letting them take it online, and if we're an online instructor, how do we kind of navigate that? I know we have policies in place, we let those expectations be out there, but I'm just kind of wondering if you have any kind of ways to construct that exam or some of those kind of things to make that less an opportunity for our students.
We can talk about this because I'm teaching online, and that gives me a good idea that maybe Theresa and I can do a session specifically focused on that, because it would be really helpful, I think. I have to worry about this all the time, and the way I think through it, I think it's different depending on the subject that you're teaching. In my film and television classes, I use quizzes as well as other assignments, and I try to make them interactive and visual. So to give you some examples, my students, I will generate a clip. Like I'll take a French New Wave film and I'll take a 2-minute segment and drop it into the test. And my students have to tell me all the different film techniques that they see in operation in that clip. And something to note here is that they can still cheat in ways that they were cheating before LLMs, right? They can be talking to each other behind the scenes. They can be using Google. There's all kinds of strategies. I'll notice 3 students have very similar answers to one question, that kind of a thing. And I just bring that up because students have always tried to do this. It's just that LLMs are a unique opportunity. But I also have exercises such as matching exercises in Canvas that Canvas lets you build so that students have to match terms to techniques, and the time it would take during a test to research all of that, it would just be very, very difficult. And so my students are giving me feedback that my tests are very interactive in that way, that they're having to engage on the spot and analyze pictures and images. And so it's keeping them active, and in some way that helps to get around some of this. So that's just one idea that came to mind. Theresa, do you have a strategy that comes to mind?
I think you've covered a lot of the things that you kind of consider skill sets that make it difficult to outsource to the AI, whether it be accessing students' experience or manipulating the setup of the interface of a quiz to be something that is difficult to implement into AI. But it's challenging, and it's something that a lot of online structures are trying to navigate, because it's a lot of work to change over quizzes that you might have already created into something that is AI proof. And so I don't have as many answers, but more just share in that experience, but also want to reassure that it's kind of a similar dilemma that we would experience with any form of plagiarism. What I find is that when I show students and talk with students about the limitations of AI output, and that it can be just as wrong as asking a friend for the answers, they're somewhat less likely to be reliant on it. And at least maybe helps those students who maybe weren't going to cheat. They were feeling panicked, they were feeling uncomfortable. They can rely a little bit more on their own study tools and tactics rather than thinking outsourcing is going to give me everything I need to. But it's a tough conversation.
So Cydney had mentioned earlier that perhaps you should do a session on that. One of our colleagues in the chat said, yes, please. And they have a couple of hearts on that. So maybe that is something we could explore a little in the future. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
That sounds great.
Definitely.
There was a question a little bit ago, early in the conversation, that Tom had asked about how do we create a fair AI policy for writing classes relying on original creation of content. And I know you had talked about sort of some of those sorts of things, but I wonder if you wanted to expand on your answer, Annie.
I love that question, because it's something as writing studies people, Cydney and I, are thinking about all the time. And I think what we've been learning, and that we've always tried to emphasize in the field of writing studies and in the Writing Center, is that every writer has a different process. That one process of creating content, it doesn't look the same as somebody else's, and that it's important that when we're talking about creating original content, the process that people take to get there can look very different, and sometimes can involve, seeking advice from a friend, talking out ideas with somebody, or, as we're learning, it might be interacting with an AI tool to bounce ideas, to paraphrase, or to make an idea that makes sense in a native language, makes sense in an English or in a language that's not one's native language. That I would try and attempt to kind of talk through with a policy or a discussion when those types of ways of, laying out your thinking, tackling an element of the process that is difficult for you, like paraphrase or ideation or outlining, might be different from something that you don't want showing up in the final product of a piece of writing. And I know some instructors have tried to do that by saying, do all the ideation and strategizing you want in the tool, but then I want you to close all that up and write on your own in your own space and kind of work with what you've learned and just see what comes out on the page. But I think it's complicated, because as we were sort of talking about with tools like Grammarly, sometimes even those latter phases that we might not think are an issue, grammar checking and proofreading, AI tools can intervene in those in ways that might take away, again, your authorship. And so I think it's hard to draw a line. about when AI tools are impeding original thought and original content and when they're assisting with that. So it's not a very clear answer. I don't know if Cydney has some things she wants to say.
I just, I think this is a really hard issue coming from the perspective of an online instructor. And one thing that I just have really noted when students are telling me why they want to lean on AI, a couple of things that I keep in mind. One is that they struggle, to them, AI writing does not sound mainstream or, quote unquote mainstream. It doesn't sound standardized, whatever that means. It sounds smart to them. And they want to sound smart and they want teachers to think that they're smart. And so there's often a good motivation behind their use of LLMs or their language learners. And they want to clean up the writing. So, and a lot of faculty want them to do this. So there's often, those are some of the motivations behind this. And it's useful to bring in examples of LLM generated writing output and talk about why it sounds like AI, to actually have that conversation in class. I think that's just one of my main suggestions. Theresa really touched on a lot there. It's a good question, an important question, but I think maybe making it plain why it might seem to instructors obvious why we don't want students to lean on AI, but it is not obvious to them. And they may even be feeling like they're trying to please us in a way. So just laying all of that bare, making it transparent, explaining what is in the writing process that you want them to do, that it's really important that they're not leaning on AI in those stages.
I'm seeing Anthony's question in the chat about if we address copyright, ecological impacts of AI in syllabus statements. I wanted to make sure we address that. I personally make reference to those things. I also refer, not, in a complete way in the policy, but refer them to AI literacy resources that explain more of those things, like the AI pedagogy project, which we mentioned here. But I kind of do so in a way that sort of acknowledges that these things have not been figured out, but that I believe that it's important for all of us to kind of develop critical thinking skills around those things so that we can make choices for ourselves. And so that's how I frame those impacts in my policy.
All right, well, we are done for today's event. Please join me in thanking Dr. Alexis and Dr. Merrick Cassidy for the wonderfully guiding and illuminating and eerie kind of things that they shared with us today. And I'll just highlight that they're doing a number of other things this academic year to help us in kind of navigating the challenges and opportunities that generative AI create. Also remind you that while today's event was fantastic in real time, it's also fantastic in its asynchronous recording, which we'll post on our website a little bit later today. We'll have a post-event survey for you in the chat that you can please complete. And I'll remind you that next week we have another great event called Large Classes for students who have to take them, whether they want to or not. And Tim Bolton will be presenting that event next week. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you once again, Cydney and Theresa, for the wonderful presentation. And I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.